Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Today's just going to be a quick little video, but it is time to start my sweet potato slips, and I wanted to make sure that I shared that process with you guys. Now you can see here, I have a bunch of sweet potatoes here. These are sweet potatoes that we grew in the garden last year, and as you can see, I've got all the little weird ones here. These are not really the ones that would be ideal for eating. You know, some of them are really small, some of them are just really skinny. Got some just twisty ones, and I have purposely been reserving these for the purpose of starting sweet potato slips. You know, all the big ones that are nice and straight and easier to eat, we've been eating those. So I have these two containers here that I am planning to start my sweet potato slips in. So there are two really common ways that a lot of gardeners use to start sweet potato slips. You'll probably see people putting their sweet potatoes into a jar of water so that the water covers about half the sweet potato and waiting for them to grow slips that way, or you can plant them in soil. I prefer the soil method because I have tried both methods of starting sweet potatoes, and I have found that in my experience there is a much higher success rate and a much quicker, it gives me much quicker results to use the soil method. Now, if you have used the jar of water method and that works better for you, then that's completely fine. I just personally have found much better results using soil. So I have these two containers here that I'm planning to start my sweet potato slips in. As you can see, this is just a leftover plastic container that we got some salad greens in, and this is just a basic gardening tray. Now, I will mention neither of these containers do have drainage holes. I'm okay with that because I'm not going to be these will have to be watered, the soil will have to be kept moist, but since I'm not starting seeds, I'm not going to be as picky about the moisture level, and I want something like this for this situation that's not going to drain. That's not to say that you couldn't do this in a container with drainage holes. You definitely can. I'm just doing it this way because it works better for my setup. So I'm just going to get these two containers filled with soil, and then I'll meet you back here. So you can see that I have these filled with soil. Now we want to pre-moisten the soil, so you're going to want your soil to have a similar moisture level to as if you were starting seeds, which means we want it to be moist enough that if you take a handful of soil and squeeze it, it's going to hold its shape, but you're not going to be able to squeeze water droplets out. So this is the moisture level that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and get started. So you can see that I have fairly shallow containers here. This one's a little deeper, but I haven't filled it fully with soil. We don't need to worry as much about soil depth with this as we would with some other seedlings because we're not planning on these developing a real root system in here. If you haven't grown sweet potato slips before, basically the idea is that you use the energy, you use this sweet potato tuber and plant it, in our case, in the soil, and it's going to start getting green shoots, and then you're going to take each of those green shoots and root them individually to make their own plants. So whatever roots this tuber develops don't really matter for the sake of the final plant. So we don't need to give it a lot of space for root development. Now, since we don't have drainage holes in this container, we definitely do want to make sure that we don't over moisten the soil. So now that the soil is the appropriate moisture level, we're just going to take our sweet potato tubers and we're just going to nestle them into the soil. I like to put them in so they're about halfway buried, but you can still see quite a bit of the tuber exposed. And I'm just gonna take these in here and just nestle them all in. So as I mentioned, these sweet potatoes came from sweet potato plants that I actually grew last summer, but you could definitely try these with store-bought sweet potatoes if you wanted to. Now, the success rate may not be quite as high as with homegrown sweet potatoes because sometimes produce in the store is treated or just is older, or just for whatever reason, you may not have quite as high of a success rate, but it is still definitely doable. Actually, the original plants, probably the grandparent plants of these, I actually started from store-bought sweet potatoes. For those of you who've been around a while, I'm sure I've told that story. I was actually teaching an intro to gardening class at my children's homeschool co-op, and one thing I wanted to do was to show how sweet potatoes grow. So I just picked up a couple sweet potatoes from the grocery store and we planted them in soil similar to this, and they actually grew really well. Now, I didn't get as many sprouts as I did last year using my homegrown sweet potatoes, but we still did get some. And what happened was we made enough for every child in the class to take one home, and then I had some extra, so I decided to just plant the extra. So I just grew them in pots on my deck that first year. They yielded, I mean, they were in pots, they didn't yield amazingly, but they yielded better than I expected them to. So last year, I took my leftovers from that harvest. I started more sweet potato slips, and that's where these came from. So we're hoping to just keep the generations going and just keep our sweet potato harvest going indefinitely. So you can see, like I said, a lot of these sweet potatoes that I'm using for this are really the weird ones that would not have been very easy to eat, but they work just fine for making slips. So that way we can save the nice big ones for eating. So I'm going to set these sweet potatoes up under my grow lights, and I'm going to treat them just like seedlings. I'm going to give them light during the day, and I'm going to make sure that the soil doesn't dry out. When they're growing, basically these are dormant plants right now, and we want them to wake up. So we want to give them sunlight, we want to give them warmth, and we want to give them moisture. Those are the things that are going to basically tell them that it is springtime again and it's time for them to come out of their dormancy. So you can see I have this heat mat here. I'm going to be starting these on a heat mat. Sweet potatoes are a really heat-loving crop. They are going to do much better and they are going to produce slips much more quickly if I give them a heat source. That doesn't mean that you can't start them without a heat mat. The first set of sweet potato slips that I started, the ones that I mentioned before that I actually got from the grocery store, I didn't use a heat mat for those, and they ended up doing fine. But I did find that last year when I used the heat mat for my sweet potatoes, they produced a lot more slips and they produced slips a lot more quickly. They just seemed healthier overall. So it's one of those things that's not completely necessary, but it is definitely recommended. I'm just going to stick these in here. We're just going to turn on our heat mat to about a medium heat and turn on the grow light. So with the heat mat going, these should start sprouting relatively quickly. I will definitely show you as they sprout. I'll show you the next steps to do, but just for the sake of having a more complete video, I'll go over it really quickly right now. So basically when these sweet potatoes first start sprouting, they'll get little tiny nubs that will eventually turn into nice green sweet potato sprouts. What will happen, you just want to let those grow. When they get to be about 6 inches long or so, say maybe 6 to 8 inches long, you want to snap them off of the potato, the sweet potato, right at the base. And then what I like to do is just take those slips and put them in a glass of water. They'll develop their own roots really quickly, probably within a week or so. They'll have a pretty decent root system. And then if it's warm enough outside, at that point what I do is I take those rooted sweet potato slips outside, I harden them off gradually, and then I plant them in my garden. If it's not warm enough, which was the case last year we had a pretty long, cool end of spring. You know, winter kind of dragged on a little bit longer than I would have liked. And the sweet potato slips were ready before the garden was ready for them. So I ended up, once they had roots, I put them into their own individual pots with their own soil, just to get them a little bit more established in soil. And then when it was warm enough outside, I transplanted them outside. That worked really well. We had a great harvest. So as I said, I will definitely show you all those steps as it happens, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a rundown now so you know what to expect. So here in Connecticut, we tend to have kind of late springs. Winter, a lot of times, as I mentioned, does drag on a little more than we would like. So sweet potato slips can also take a little while to get going. So here in Connecticut, for me, starting them at the end of February is the way to go. That's something that you may kind of play around with and see what works best for you. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today as we really got started on our 2024 spring garden. Starting sweet potato slips is so easy, and you know, it really isn't even that much of an investment. If you start from grocery store sweet potatoes, it really is, as I said, you really have nothing to lose. So I definitely encourage you to give it a try if you enjoy sweet potatoes. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me getting my sweet potato slips started. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.